Scott Traylor. I'm the president for the San Francisco Bay Area chapter of the Children's Media Association. I've been with the organization a long, long time. It's a really great professional group offering all kinds of services for those that work in children's media. Great informative presentations like the one we're about to present to you, as well as mentorship and job boards and meetups. If you're a member, thank you so much for supporting us. We are a nonprofit, all-volunteer organization, and we rely on members to keep us afloat. If you're not a member, please do consider joining CMA. We'd love to have you. I think you would enjoy it greatly for being a part. And if you are tech forward, I'd also ask if you might consider joining the Children's Media Association Bay Area chapter, where we put on lots of tech forward events, things related to software and apps and research and technology toys, social justice, where while you may not be able to attend some of our events in person, we offer many more online with a great theme of kids and technology. That said, let me share just a brief introduction. Jason Krogh, the founder and general manager of Sago Mini. Just before we got started, we were trying to figure out when we met. We've both been around the block a long time, guessing 15 years maybe. And as you'll soon see, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the work of Sago Mini. It is quite impressive, a leader in its category globally. And that said, Jason, why don't I hand it over to you to get us started?
Yes, and thank you for the invitation to come and talk to this group. I like following the CMA, and I especially like the stuff that comes out of the Bay Area chapter. So it's a great way to stay in touch. So here's the kind of plan for today. I have a little bit of a section that's a very brief history of the studio and how we've kind of grown over the years. I have a section that sort of speaks to sort of our design principles, a little bit of the philosophy behind the studio. And then because theory kind of gets, a little boring at some point, I dive into a specific example of a mechanic that we worked on, just to kind of demonstrate how some of that philosophy and approach kind of comes into play in real life. I'm really hoping for some questions, and I'll try to leave some time for the Q&A, because that's always the interesting part, let's be honest. So scribble down your questions, and I think they're going to be collected, and we're going to have some time at the end to talk about those. So hi, my name is Jason. These are my slides. And this is what we make. I always like to use images with our products in the hands of kids. And for me, it's very important because, it frames what we do, which is not to create this content that sits behind the glass, but to create this experience, right? To create what happens holistically when the kids are using the products. It's not a complicated idea, but it's amazing how quickly you can kind of lose track of that. You're working away in isolation on screens all day long, thinking about what happens inside those corners. I almost kind of want to take these photos and just kind of like print them all over the walls around our office, because you just have to be constantly reminding yourself that what you're creating on the glass is sort of half of the experience. So this is kind of where the journey begins. I had spent many years in my early career developing interactive media for kids. But at the time, this is way back, before touchscreens were pervasive, there was always sort of a bottom limit in terms of age range. When you get down to about 5 or 6 years old, there was really not much that we could offer in terms of interactive media, just because you were stuck with the mouse and the keyboard. We puzzled around this. There was a lot of work around using camera-based interaction, things like this. When the phone first came out, we got quite excited about what prospects this might open up. And we created SoundShaker as just like a fun side project. We were doing work for a lot of clients at the time. And we approached it from a bit of a different perspective, because instead of taking the products that we were doing on the web and on CD-ROM and kiosks and stuff as a starting point, we went to infant and toddler toys as the starting point. And we're basically like, how could we recreate some of these types of experiences on this very expensive piece of hardware, which some people thought was hilarious. The response when we first launched these products was all over the place. But kids really enjoyed it. And we actually went on to create a whole series of these products, very focused, very simple, kind of one-hit things. I think we had launched 10 or 11 of them. And it was great fun, but it wasn't really much of a business. It was something that we did because we were excited about it. But it led us to the next sort of stage of our journey, which was becoming fast friends with the Swedes at Toka Boka. And at the time, they were just hitting their stride with the launch of the first hair salon app and looking for ways to kind of expand what they were doing. And we cooked up this crazy plan, which was to set up a studio in Toronto. That was going to be sort of, or it is still today, the sibling studio. The younger brother, sister, sibling to the slightly more established Toka Boka. And this continues today. In 2016, both studios were acquired by Spin Master, which, funnily enough, is based in Toronto, just down the street here. They are a global toy, entertainment, and now gaming company. And so instead of me making trips to Sweden, there was more trips from Sweden back to Canada. And so here we are today. We have our little team that started out about 8 is now about 80. Total cross section of disciplines. We have millions of players across 3 core products: Sago Mini World, which is sort of our digital playground; Sago Mini School, which is our learning focused product; and most recently First Words, which is a very playful take on video modeling for speech language therapy. And then I guess the other big project, we have a lot of projects. We can't help ourselves. We keep spinning out new things. But probably the biggest has been the TV show, which we have done with our colleagues at Spin Master Entertainment and Apple TV Plus, called Sago Mini Friends. Whole nother presentation probably in that one. So what's interesting is that a lot of the basic ideas that started us in those first few months have remained the same throughout. And I'm just going to be totally transparent and share them here today. We've always seen our products as being ones that avoid instruction, rules, and assessment. They're really meant to be digital playgrounds, and I'm going to show you some playgrounds at some point today. Our idea is all around playful and playable experiences, and also creating experiences where kids can kind of see themselves reflected, they can see their world reflected, and they can also have influence and control over the experience. When it comes to technology, we're sort of fundamentally techno-optimistic, I would say, with a slight hesitation. But this idea that technology as applies to childhood can be done appropriately, can be done inappropriately. If you do it well, it has the effect of magnifying the work of the child, and that's what we're here to do. So, who we work for? Designing for preschoolers is a unique and fun challenge. And I like these images just because they remind me of who we are designing for. A sad tiger having miso soup, or potentially a plumber princess who's learning how to unclog the toilet. I know it sounds cheesy, but it is a magical age. It's an age where your incredible powers of observation and sort of a bit of a view of the world, which is unique and unbiased in many ways. It presents lots of challenges when it comes to interaction design, but boy, is it worth it. So the things you want to lean into, the things that we've leaned into, really come down to the superpowers of every preschooler, which in my mind really revolve around observing, exploring, and imitating. I think if you spent a good amount of time with a 3 or 4-year-old lately, you've probably had them point something out to you which you were completely oblivious to. Just walking down the street. We, as adults, we start to learn how to apply very heavy filters to everything we see and do. We don't see words as a bunch of shapes kind of, outlined on a sign. We just see the meaning, and it kind of gets instantly translated. Anyways, there's a lot that you can work with here. These kids are incredibly learning. They're incredibly curious. They're incredible at asking questions. And so all you really need to do is lay that out, and the kids will do the rest. So again, in that first year or two, when we came together as a group, we put together sort of a list of design lenses. And this is something that any of you can do, anyone can do, very much inspired by the design lenses that you'll find in The Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell. What we wanted to do is sort of take it and apply it to our preschool audience and our brand and our ethos. And so essentially, I love lenses as a model because it's not prescriptive. It's not really dogmatic. It's basically just, these are questions that deserve to be answered, deserve to be explored as you're working on any kind of product. And it's not a checklist. It's not like every single thing that we do has to sort of apply every single element of this. I just included a sampling. This is 6, but the list keeps growing. It's probably at 20 something now. But there's some of the more sort of important ones. Relatability. That's should be familiar to anybody, I imagine, here. It's just that idea of like, are we using things that kids can kind of label, that they can identify, that they can potentially run into or experience in real life in their day-to-day? Or are we filling, the experience with a lot of abstract stuff that we may find really delightful, but that no kid's actually going to recognize or be able to connect to their lives? Control. This is a very big one for us, which is really, when you're designing interactive experiences, you're always trying to decide, what are the limits to control? What are the boundaries? What are we going to allow the user to control? What are we going to control? And what's that balance like? We always err towards handing control over to the kid as much as humanly possible. And so we always have to ask ourselves, do we need to? Are we sure we need to? And a classic example for us is when we did Road Trip, which is a driving game. You're sort of driving a car around. And in the prototype, we hadn't actually locked the car to the ground. So kids could take the car and fly up into the sky. When we saw this in playtesting, we were like, yeah, okay, that works. I mean, it's no different if I was, playing with a toy car. So sure. And we went back and we changed the project to allow kids to just drag the car wherever they wanted. Seamless and responsive kind of go hand in hand. But if you want to really kind of create an illusion of a sort of toyetic experience, it's really has to feel smooth. And so those little transitions that they experience throughout, you have to try to really smooth those out, or else that sort of illusion disappears. And when it comes to responsiveness, it's really a question of like, are we listening? When you have that experience and your kid is talking to you and you're a little distracted, you're not taking in, what do? They start shouting, and then they shout even louder. When it comes to an iPad, if the kid expects something to happen, the first response, if nothing is happening, is to press even harder on the screen. Makes sense? Doesn't actually fix the problem, but the point is that it's really important when we're designing those experiences to acknowledge those touch points. Even if it's just a subtle thing, sound effect, little particle effect, something, as much as humanly possible to say, yeah, we heard you, the button was pressed, the thing was tapped, you've picked up that object, and so you have to really think about that. Openness, again, I'm going to touch on this later, but the gaps that you leave in the experience are often sort of more important than the other parts of the experience. And so the more open you can make the experience, the more you can allow the kid to invest themselves and tailor their experience to themselves. It's just going to allow you to appeal, honestly, to a wider range of kids and allow them to be more invested. And then the last point is surprise. And again, there can be good surprise and there can be bad surprise. When we talk about surprise in our apps, it's that little delightful moment that comes along once in a while that puts a smile on the kid's face or gets a little giggle, but it isn't so disruptive that they end up feeling lost or thrown off course. And it's important to kind of sprinkle those around. I mean, I always think of the example of great kids books, which you read multiple times, many, many, many times in some cases, and you start to notice those little details that are kind of buried in the background of the images. And those are things that are often make for nice surprises. On the third or fourth read, you start to pick up on them. All right, so that's me rambling about lenses. Let me get moving again. I wanted to talk really briefly about playtesting because it is sort of very integral to everything we do. There really is not a week that goes by that we haven't been playtesting something or other. And no matter how good you think you are at designing these experiences, you will always, always, always learn something by just observing your product in the kids' hands. So there's lots of different versions of playtesting or types of playtesting. When we do this, there's really sort of two main themes or two main benefits that we get out of it. One is in informing us as designers. So I would put that in the bucket of design research. This happens at very early stages, and we're thinking about what we're going to build next, where we might be taking a toy version of the experience or a paper prototype version of the experience, or really anything. It could be a kid's book that kind of relates on the same themes. And we're sitting down with kids and seeing how they connect or not connect with those themes. So really, it's a way to educate ourselves to become better, smarter, more empathetic designers. And then the other part is what we call can-do testing, which is where we have a prototype or we have a finished product or nearly finished product, and we want to kind of see and do a check to make sure kids can get through it. So we're looking for things like, do they know how to get started? Are there dead ends? Are there places they just kind of get stuck and they're like, okay, I'm out. They're going to go off and do something else. How does the pacing, the difficulty, and the flow feel? Is it keeping them engaged, or is it just kind of feeling like a monotone thing that just goes on and on? And then lastly, we're always looking for mistakes. We're looking for errors. And I mention this because, you can QA test all you want, but a 3-year-old will find something that you haven't found yet, guaranteed. We learned that lesson the hard way in the very first year. We built so many things that we were so proud of, and then we put in the hands of kids, and they just destroyed them. So it's really important to test them in their natural habitat, so to speak. One of the hardest parts of doing effective testing is being okay with letting the user struggle. It's especially hard when the user's 4 years old and is having a really tough time. And again, we know this, but I think even I find this difficult, and other people find it difficult all the time. When you've just done all this work, you've put it in front of a kid, and within 5 seconds, they're just ripping their hair out. But the key is to give them the smallest possible amount of prompting and help to get through the experience. As soon as you intervene, as soon as you put your finger on the screen, you've kind of destroyed most of the value of that playtesting session. And so it's difficult, but it's absolutely critical. And if people have questions about playtesting, I'd love to hear them. Playgrounds are something we talk a lot about. So we talk about digital toys, but we also talk about digital playgrounds. And I think, this is always a good analogy in terms of the sort of feeling that we want to create when a kid enters our apps. it's, you don't really go to a playground and you're told like, oh, you have to start here. And then you have to follow the sequence of events. And, oh, good job for realizing you could go down the slide. We're going to sort of congratulate you all the way through. What fun would that be? Most of the fun of playgrounds is actually looking at them and going, huh, okay, I can see what I can do with this. And then maybe it's not the same as what the other kids are doing. There's always going to be that old kid who's doing something really dangerous, and the young kids are, yeah, but that's kind of part of the fun. All right. Time spent in playgrounds is never a bad idea as far as I'm concerned. All right. So we're kind of through the first two bits I wanted to talk about. Now I wanted to kind of dive into a very specific example. It's nice to talk about all these lofty ideas and processes, but it's always good to see a little bit of how this stuff is built. So I'm going to talk about Sago Mini School, which is our kind of learning-focused product that we launched in 2020, I guess 3.5 years ago now. When we built School, we looked around a lot of the educational products out there. And we decided that what we wanted to try to do is build a learning app that really gives agency over to the kids, that is all about celebrating curiosity and effort rather than necessarily results, that celebrates play and doesn't try to make it, as something distinct from learning, and is intrinsically rewarding. So it's full of satisfying moments as you go. You won't really find any stickers, badges, points, awards, et cetera, in Sago Mini School. Another way to put it is that we were trying to sort of recreate a little bit of the feeling of a Montessori classroom on a screen. And by which I mean, like in Montessori, you get a curated set of activities that are kind of in the right zone for your sort of age and stage. And then once you've kind of been demonstrated them, it's up to you how you want to go back and navigate through that content. And you're given a good amount of flexibility and agency. Yes, if the kid goes back and does the same thing every day for 2 months, they might get prompted onto something else. But the really powerful part of this is just that it sends a signal that the kid is responsible for their learning. And I think that's one of those kind of hidden messages that the more we structure learning and build rewards around it, we're actually reinforcing this idea that it's sort of someone else's job. And I think it's really important to reinforce this idea for kids that, no, this is something you should want to do and is naturally satisfying. And in fact, you get the chance to build that muscle and it's really yours, something to sort of own. So what we did is we sat down and we started thinking about learning goals and learning topics. We sat down and looked at curriculum from various preschools. Ontario, by the way, has a really good play-based preschool curriculum, kindergarten curriculum. Started, just ticking them off one by one and trying to figure out mechanics that we can develop around them. And then we took these collections and we kind of skinned them with a theme or a topic. This is where the relatability comes in. Grocery is probably one of my favorites. I've never met a preschooler who doesn't get a kick out of an adventure in a grocery store. It checks all the boxes being relatable, and you can teach pretty much anything in the context of a grocery store. It's fantastic. So another way of talking about this is the idea of sort of affordances for learning. And so, design and affordance is something where the form of the object kind of hints at its function or what you're supposed to do with it. And so what we're trying to do when we design our mechanics is how do we build something which just naturally you want to interact with in a way that reinforces the learning. So the example I was going to show is what we call the swap it mechanic. It's a little puzzle where essentially you have to take these rods and you have to put them into a specific sequence. So in this case, you're trying to get the sequence from taller to shorter, larger to smaller. In terms of process, again, I spoke to kind of that initial research, looking at curriculum areas and learning goals, looking at strategies and mechanisms that teachers would use in a classroom setting to reinforce these ideas. So there was some early work done there. We have some we have some great educational consultants who help us as we dig into this material. And then it goes over to a play designer, or in some cases a developer, to figure out like, what is the idea? What is the actual mechanic going to be? And I kind of put this slide up as a joke, because the reality is that these ideas are, this is the tricky part, right? Is that to kind of come up with a fully formed idea, to translate that idea, that concept or inspiration into something that you can build is very hard. And I think we underestimate the amount of work that goes into that step of things. And a lot of people, they shortcut it by just copying material from somewhere else, or being inspired by somewhere else to a greater or lesser extent. But once in a while, you get a chance to kind of go at it with fresh eyes and put in the time, and you're going to come up with 20 ideas, and 15 of them are going to be terrible, 4 of them probably not workable, and maybe 1 will actually work. So this is what we came up with, or rather John Park, in this case, came up with. And so to describe a new mechanic, we always rely on an animatic. In this case, the animatic is a little piece of linear animation. There's no code, but it doesn't have to be done on screen. The key to a good animatic is that it has to convey the interaction, the idea. It has to show you what the finger is doing. That is critical. I've seen animatics or versions of animatics where you just see the movement or what the app is doing, but it doesn't actually show you what the user is doing. And that's a big problem. But we've done animatics that are literally puppet shows, paper on popsicle sticks, live action role play, lots of different ways to kind of explain your concept before you actually have to build it. So let me just show you what this one looks like. There's our finger. It's really important when you're doing animatics or prototypes to really not worry about the artwork and the visual treatment. It's hard because you want to start drawing pictures. You start want to put in the background, but it actually makes it harder to get at the crux of whether this is a good mechanic or not. So our animatics are always very minimalist, very stripped down. But it conveys the whole idea. Like once the team saw this, we were like, yep, this is a thing. This can be built. This will be fun. We could see lots of potential for where it could go. Very exciting documentation. I'm not going to read this, but the idea is that you do have to do the work of sitting down and trying to figure out the interaction rules. If you're a coder, you can just start working on your prototype. But if not, it's pretty important to kind of sit down and work this stuff out. You will always find edge cases or weird stuff you didn't anticipate. Okay, time to circle back with the education experts. And this is where, especially for a product like school, we need to get input on the difficulty level is a big one. And how challenging we want to be or not be with these things. Lots and lots of other questions. And it's all a discussion. We get a lot of notes back. A few of them are incorporated and a bunch aren't, and that's okay. It's really the play designer who gets to be the judge of what's going to actually fit. Okay, we're making progress here. This has probably been like a couple of weeks now that we've been thinking about this one. Time to actually code something. So here's a little video recording of the prototype for this mechanic. You can see John Park's having a bit of fun adding a few extra elements in here. But still, there's no finished artwork. There's no sound design. You'll notice there's a little bit of color and brightness used to kind of help differentiate the sort of fixed parts to the interactive parts. And you can see that he's starting to think about how to ramp up the difficulty. So we started out with this idea of like just going from sequence, from tallest to smallest, or smallest to tallest, and we've now kind of introduced extra pieces here. All right. Time for more play testing. I mentioned there's a lot of play testing.
Under sandbox.
You can see you've added just a little bit of sound design there. I'll play the first one again
Under sandbox.
because you'll see something that was a bit of a problem.
Sandbox.
Okay, so right there, you'll see, the fingers going for the character, and of course they are. It's a bright yellow circle. This is always one of those things that we think a little extra about. Is what is the first thing the finger goes for? And it's the eye that guides you there. And the solve was fine. What we did is we actually have, in the finished version, which I'll show you in a second, we have the characters and the end point show up first. The movable rods, they actually get added after. And so because they're the last thing that kind of bounce in, that's where the eye goes, that's where the finger goes. Easy solve. But those are the kind of subtle things we're looking for here. Finally, the art team gets to do their thing. And we think about how we're going to skin this, how we're going to do the treatment. A lot of beautiful, talented people worked on this. The first version was done with a playground theme. We did a subsequent version set in the forest, which I'll show you in a second. The key thing here is just that, again, don't get ahead of yourself. Don't complicate your lives with doing a lot of artwork until you've done multiple iterations on that prototype and play testing. Otherwise, you create, it's harder almost to see what's working and not working because it's hard to tell if the kids are just responding to the art treatment or the mechanic. But not only that, the truth is that a lot of our mechanics get shelved or just never see the light of day. They just don't work. And it's a lot faster if you can just kind of crank them out without doing a lot of artwork. Finally, we get to the finished product. So this is going to run in a minute or two, but I think it's worth taking a look at. I think the team just did a fantastic job on this. I think I could just listen to that, like over and over and over again. It's extremely satisfying. Okay. So when I found out I was going to be talking today, I went back to Lisa and John, who were two of the main people who worked on this project. And I just asked them, it's been a while, looking back at this, what are your thoughts? Both came back with great ideas. Lisa's first comment was just, she remembered how they were very nervous about whether it was going to be too difficult. Some of the levels, the puzzles got a little challenging towards the end. And there was a bit of discussion as to whether it would frustrate kids or not. And in the end, they decided to put in some of those more challenging levels. And the result was super positive. Most kids really stuck with it. And, even if they had to try a lot of trial and error, they got there in the end. And there was a lot of satisfaction that the kids felt, not just from the kids, but also from their parents. And we heard that, and Lisa heard that their parents were kind of shocked at some of the puzzles that the kid was able to do in front of them. And the kids were like really proud of that and showing it off to their parents. So that was, I remember that. And I think that was a really good point. And then John hit it on the nose as well. His whole thing was about how, we managed to create a problem or a puzzle or a setup that, again, didn't really require overt instruction. And so this is one of those things when you're creating these experiences is that, the goal is not to just do the thing. It's not just to, put them in the right order as quickly as possible. Part of the goal is actually kind of looking at the situation and trying to figure out what the question is. And so I think, his point was like, yeah, I felt like this was a particularly strong example of that, where we kind of lay it there. You've got an animal, they're hungry, there's a snack. What are you going to do? And, we didn't have the sort of need to lay out exactly what they were supposed to do. And that just kind of made it, that much more rewarding in the end. So now we're in grab bag time. I think this is almost the last slide. But just when I was reflecting, it's been 10 years of doing Sago Mini, 14 of doing these kind of apps for preschoolers. I try to distill it down into a short list of advice. And, I don't think any of it's earth-shattering news, but the first one is to make sure that you try to favor direct manipulation over any kind of virtual controls when it comes to younger kids. If there's an opportunity for the kid to get the thing from here to there by picking it up, that's what they're going to do. Always use the eye to get the finger to the starting line. Animation, color, lots of opportunities to get their finger going in the right place at the beginning and set them off to the races. Really be careful about trying to brute force your way through a UX problem. If you take it too literally, it's easy to solve any UX problem just by layering on instructions, by putting lots of guardrails around it. Make sure you explore all the possibilities before you kind of resort to those things. In some cases, they're appropriate, they make sense, but don't let it become the first thing you go to. The idea of leaving gaps in the experience. I think this is one of those things where interactive media can be so much more powerful than linear narrative entertainment media, because the kid can actually control the pacing. And some kids, they want to race through it. Some kids, they want to go slow. Some kids, they want to wrap story around everything that they do. They'll just invent stories nonstop through the whole thing. Other kids, that's not what they're into. So take advantage of that and leave some of those blank spaces. Always remember not to get too enamored with your art and your tech. Frame rate's great, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how good your frame rate is, it doesn't matter how beautifully executed your artwork is, if the play isn't there. And so it requires a certain humility. I mean, I'm very proud of the talent that we have at Sago Mini on the tech side and the art side. But part of it is having that humility to not get in love with that part of it. too much or at the detriment of the play. And then, the last thing goes back to the play testing, which is there's going to be a very strong urge, especially if you're the one doing the play testing, to explain away poor results or outcomes. To say, well, it was just that kid, or, oh, when we put in the finished artwork, it'll be fine. Oh, once we have the sound effects, it'll be okay. Be careful. If you're seeing a kid do something, if you've got a sample of 3 or 4, and there's more than half running into a problem, it's probably time to go back and rethink it. If it's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5, then yeah, that's going to be different. But just be aware that there's going to be, within yourself, within the team, within all sorts of things, there's a pressure to ship, there's a pressure to wrap it up, there's a pressure to move on to the next thing. When I threw that black box where the ideas come up on the screen, one thing I didn't mention is that we really don't have a timeline for that stage of things. We try as much as possible to work on the ideas on a bit of a separate timeline than the production schedule. Because, if you say, come up with a great mechanic, it hits these learning goals, and oh yes, we need it by Tuesday, the odds of you actually coming up with anything good is pretty low. Because it's just one of those things. It can happen quickly, or it can happen slowly. And then the last one, which is just, again, going very back to the beginning, that, what you're creating is not pixels on a screen. It's not a bunch of, interaction rules or wireframes. It really is sort of the whole package. And so as a designer, you're half of it, child's the other half of it, and you have to be kind of looking at that as a whole. And I think I have made it.
Oh, there we are. We have our first question here. What's it like marketing towards preschoolers? What channels are you using, and how are you convincing both the parent and preschooler to try a game?
Marketing. So what's it like marketing towards preschoolers? Well, it's extremely challenging because you are basically dealing, as this person knows, to 2 different audiences. You have to have the appeal and interest of the kid, and you have to get the buy-in from the parent, who ultimately is making the purchasing decisions. So there's no singular answer to this, other than you need to appeal to both. You need to kind of run their filter through both. So you have to, the best thing to do, honestly, is to just do a lot of interviews with parents. Talk to them about what they use, what they don't use, and why, and try to get inside their head and understanding the value that they see in products like yours. And then try to find concise ways to make that pitch. But it's not easy. In terms of channels, I think, the most underestimated one, honestly, is just the store platforms themselves. When you think about your App Store icon, your App Store screenshots, that's probably the place where you want to put most of your attention to at the beginning. Over time, we've started to scale up our marketing, and essentially we've dabbled in all of the popular marketing channels, from Facebook to Google, etc., as a way to try to reach customers. But you have to do it carefully, because there's also extra layers when it comes to the ethical and regulatory requirements of marketing a kid's product. So do your homework.
Awesome. Okay, it's from Josh. Are the design lenses evaluated during development in some kind of rigorous review process, or are they more guidelines to keep in mind?
They're more guidelines. We don't do a lot of what I would call rigorous review processes. Like, things do, I get a chance to kind of review and look at a lot of the work. Some of our senior, more experienced play designers, Lisa being one of them, Davin being another one, they have a chance to kind of lay eyes on things. But no, they're not meant to be a checklist or a scorecard necessarily. They're essentially just a prompt for the discussions that happen organically across the company.
Awesome. Next up from Robin, what are some best practices for playtesting in person and virtually? Do you typically film the playtesting sessions?
Yes, we do typically film the playtesting sessions. So we use Playtest Cloud as a tool for remote testing. And then when we do it in person, we have a little webcam rig. You probably saw it in one of the photos there. That's typically attached so we can see the user's finger as well as what's happening on the screen, and we can record it. The best practices could be a whole presentation probably in itself. Dr. Adriana Rogerio, who's our researcher, is a real expert in this. But I think I would go back to that whole thing about, especially in person, you want to make everyone feel very comfortable. You need to make the kid feel comfortable and welcome. We have an area of the office that kind of feels like it's got a couch and some crayons and things like this. But you want to, in many cases, just kind of present the work and then observe. And I think that's the biggest best practice in my mind, is to just be an observer and watch and see what happens. And you'll learn a lot.
Could I ask a follow-up to that? Do you have families who come in for testing or remotely for testing, like a release that you use, or do you offer stipends and that sort of thing?
Yep, we offer a small stipend, and we have them sign a release so that we can make sure that we're okay if we need to use the video content.
Awesome. Great. Karen, how about the next one? All right. Tiff says, do you do any level of co-design with kids prior to play testing? Oh, that's great. It's a young age group, so I imagine ideation may be harder, but not impossible. Oh, I'm not sure if I captured that correctly.
No.
Yeah.
It's a good question, and the answer is yes. It happens to different degrees depending on the product. It often happens on things like the initial inspiration and relatability phase. So as an example, we recently released the Castles playset in Sago Mini World. And one of the things we did there was we sat down with kids and had them draw pictures of castles with us. Drawing pictures of things is just a great way to get ideas flowing. And we literally went through those pictures and we're like, okay, we got to have one of those, and we got to have one of these. We also had some castle playset toys and had kids playing with those, and we're just observing what stories were they acting out, what are they kind of doing, and then making sure that how do we support those narratives in the digital version.
That's great. Wonderful. Chris asks, playtesting, do you have dedicated people to do this and then feedback to the teams, or do the designers, coders also attend and watch these sessions?
So we do a mix. Most of the time when it's in person, the play designer is there in the room. And historically, I've always been a fan of trying to, as much as possible, include a wider group, including developers, in some of those play testing sessions. You don't want to have too many people in the room. It can throw things off. But once in a while, we'll try, especially with new hires as part of our onboarding process, we'll have them maybe join a playtesting session. If nothing else, it's a huge motivator. I can distinctly remember a few times we were playtesting something. Kids were getting frustrated. Developer was like, oh my God, running back to their desk, redoing the build in time for the next playtester who was about to show up, right? And so there's nothing like seeing a kid firsthand get stuck on something to kind of motivate everybody to address it.
That's awesome. All righty, moving right along. Karen, Matt asks, how was the process of going from app-based interactive media to a more linear style show for Apple TV? Great question.
Yeah, that's a meaty one. It's really tricky because what's interesting is that back when we were in our agency days, many times we were creating interactive content for linear TV. So we did work a lot of TV producers and preschool and channels creating digital games. We always had this problem of educating everybody that making a game is just fundamentally different than making a show. In this case, it was kind of the tables were turned, and suddenly we had all these TV producers kind of asking us like, okay, so where do we start? And so I think the biggest thing was just understanding that the show is not the same as the app. and that the people creating the show have to be entrusted with doing things that make sense for that medium. So like our characters don't talk, they don't have voices in the apps. In fact, we just don't like using a lot of dialogue, period, because we find it actually gets in the way of the dialogue of the child when they're playing. But that's a tough thing to do in linear entertainment. So I think the simplified version was to kind of distill back and try to find the common themes of the brand. And that comes a lot of times from the parents and the audience, what they say about us, what they think about us, and then giving that over to very, very smart people who make TV and giving them some room to play. And I think the big unlock for us was when the team started centered around the idea of gratitude and thankfulness as being the sort of theme for the show. And we were like, yeah, it fits. Like there's so many different stories you can tell, and it feels good. It feels right. It's the kind of thing that our parents would connect with. Instead of literally saying like, oh, we have a castle in the app and we should have a castle in the show, or we have this in the app and we should have that in the show. So it was trying to go, a bit of a layer down. But it's a huge challenge putting together a show. It's a massive undertaking.
Those are really fantastic insights, Jason. I often say going from one medium to another is the unlearning of what you carry with you going into a new medium, or old medium in this case. Karen, do we have another? Great. Chris also asks, have you considered other platforms such as the Nintendo Switch or making the games playable via the web browser?
We have. That's the short answer. We haven't pursued it yet. I think the closest we've come is we've probably done a few experiments with browser-based versions of our games, especially for things like touchscreen Chromebooks and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of the Switch. I'd love to be on the Switch one day. It's a whole different business, though, I would say. And so I think that's a matter of trying to have confidence around doing that in a way that's makes business sense. But yes, I'd love to one day. Maybe Chris, you can help.
That'd be a powerful team. Liz asks, what advice would you give to someone beginning their career in developing educational and interactive experiences for kids?
That's a big question. I think the biggest unlock, at least for me, was dabbling in a lot of different disciplines and learning just enough in those different disciplines to have a good conversation with experts, right? You don't need to be a developer to do this work, but you need to be able to speak to a developer in a useful, constructive way. If you go and learn yourself some basic coding techniques, use Scratch, use whatever, you're going to have a much more productive and useful conversation with a developer. Same thing goes with educational consultants, same things goes all these sort of specialties. So if you're thinking about, it depends on which area you want to get into, but if you want to be the one kind of designing some of these experiences, then I would just encourage you to go broad and be curious and build up some expertise in a wide range of things.
Do you get feedback on animatics from children? If so, how does that process work? What do you ask the children?
We don't get feedback on animatics. So the animatic is largely for ourselves. The question it's there to answer is this a buildable thing? And do we think it would be interesting? But it's not until we have a prototype that we actually bring kids typically into the conversation.
Great. I think we're just about running out of time here. Thank you so much, all of you, for your questions and for participating in this really informative get-together, Jason. Thank you so much. As I had shared in the comments, Jason and I had an interview recently that was published in Kidscreen yesterday. If you haven't seen it, Jason answers many other questions there. The link is in the chat. And let me thank you all again for for joining us today. For those that are members, thank you for supporting us. For those that are not members, please do consider joining CMA. We have many great benefits, many great professional insights, and you'll get a lot of value out of being a member. We currently have 3 chapters in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and New York, though we are planning to announce some other cities sometime soon, hopefully nearest you. But we do have many members that are not in a city that get great value out of attending virtual events. In fact, for the Bay Area, our next one is coming up. I can only tease it a little bit in late January. A very cool technology for early learning that we can't wait to talk more about. And speaking of which, if you're not a member and you're a tech forward, please do consider joining the San Francisco Bay Area chapter, where that is one of our primary focuses in children's media. We think of it broadly in terms of software, interactive technology, toys, and research, as well as social justice. And we'd love to have you join our chapter. And if you're local, our next local event will be in Santa Clara on December 12th. It's a Tuesday from 7 to 9 p.m. It's going to be held at a craft beer tasting place called Taplands. Hope you can make it. If you can't in person, we look forward to seeing you in our next virtual event. Jason, thank you again. And for everyone out there, please take this great advice and go out there and make amazing products for kids. We look forward to speaking with you again another time. Thank you.